A finance executive at a real company gets an email from her CEO. Urgent. Wire $47,000 to a new vendor before 3 p.m., he's in back-to-back board meetings and can't take a call. The email address looks right. The tone sounds right, clipped, a little impatient, exactly how he writes when he's stressed. She sends the wire. 20 minutes later, the real CEO walks past her desk on his way to lunch, utterly unaware anything happened. This woman has a business degree, a decade of experience, and an IQ that would put her in the top percentile of the company. She has sat through the annual security training. She knows, in the abstract, that scams like this exist. And she just handed $47,000 to a stranger because of an email. This isn't a story about a gullible or careless person. It's a story about something far more unsettling. Intelligence was never designed to protect you from this, and once you understand why, you'll start noticing exactly how many places in your own life are built the same way. So here's the actual question worth asking. Not, why do people get manipulated, because everyone already assumes that happens to someone else, someone less careful, someone less smart, someone who skipped the security training video. The real question is why manipulation so consistently succeeds against people who are, by every conventional measure, sharp, educated, and skeptical. Once you understand the mechanism, you'll realize intelligence was never the variable that mattered, and you'll start recognizing the exact shape of it in your own life, sometimes in places far gentler than a wire fraud email. In 2002, a psychologist named Daniel Kahneman won the Nobel Prize in Economics, an unusual achievement for someone who had never taken a single economics course in his life. His decades of research, much of it conducted with his longtime collaborator Amos Tversky, had uncovered something the field of economics had assumed away for a century. Human beings do not process information through one unified rational system. We run on two. Kahneman called them System 1 and System 2. System 1 is fast, automatic, emotional, and runs constantly without your conscious permission. System 2 is slow, effortful, logical, and only switches on when you deliberately engage it. Here's the part that matters for everything that follows. Intelligence, the kind measured by IQ tests, degrees, and professional success, lives almost entirely in System 2. It's your capacity for careful, deliberate reasoning. But most manipulation isn't aimed at System 2 at all. It's aimed directly at System 1, the fast automatic layer that fires before your careful reasoning ever gets a vote. A brilliant System 2 sitting in an unused office does nothing to stop an attack that never knocks on its door. Picture a psychology building at Yale University in 1961. Inside, an ordinary volunteer sits at a control panel with a row of switches labeled from 15 volts up to 450, the final one marked simply, danger, severe shock. A man in a gray lab coat, calm, authoritative, stands beside him, and instructs him to deliver an electric shock to a stranger in the next room every time that stranger answers a question incorrectly. The stranger, unseen, begins to cry out in pain as the voltage climbs. He begs for it to stop. The volunteer hesitates, looks at the man in the lab coat, and asks if he should continue. The man in the lab coat says, calmly, the experiment requires that you continue. Psychologist Stanley Milgram, running this study at Yale, found something that shook the field of psychology to its foundation. 65% of ordinary participants, teachers, engineers, postal workers, people with no history of cruelty, continued administering shocks all the way to the maximum 450 volts, simply because a calm authority figure in a lab coat told them the experiment required it. The shocks were fake. The screams were recorded. But the compliance was completely real, and it had nothing to do with intelligence. Milgram later noted that education level showed almost no correlation with resistance to the instructions. What mattered wasn't how smart the volunteer was. What mattered was a single automatic instinct, deeply ancient, that treats calm authority as a signal to stop questioning and start obeying. That instinct did not evolve in a psychology lab, and it wasn't designed by anyone. It evolved because for most of human history, deferring instantly to a tribal leader, an elder, or someone visibly in charge was the difference between group survival and chaos. A hunting party that stopped to debate the leader's judgment mid-crisis didn't survive the crisis long enough to finish the debate. Hesitating to question authority in the middle of a genuine crisis got people killed, over and over, for a very long time. Your brain still runs that ancient shortcut today, and it doesn't check your resume before firing. Now picture a different room, a few years earlier, at Swarthmore College in Pennsylvania. Psychologist Solomon Asch gathers a small group of students, ostensibly for a simple vision test. He shows them a line on a card, then 3 comparison lines, and asks which comparison line matches the original in length. The answer is obvious, unambiguous, visible to anyone with working eyesight, the kind of question a distracted child could answer correctly without thinking twice. But here's the trick. Every other person in the room is a plant, instructed in advance to confidently give the same wrong answer. The one real subject, watching everyone before him state something visibly false with total confidence, has to decide whether to trust their own eyes or go along with the group. Asch found that roughly a third of real participants conformed to the obviously incorrect group answer at least once, and about 3/4 conformed at least one time across multiple trials. Afterward, some participants insisted they had genuinely started to see the line differently, that the group's confidence had actually altered their perception, not just their answer. Intelligence didn't protect anyone here either. If anything, the more socially aware and cooperative a person was, the more susceptible they were to the pull of group consensus, because reading and responding to social cues is itself a marker of social intelligence, not a defense against it. This is where manipulation stops being random and starts being engineered. Psychologist Robert Cialdini, now at Arizona State University, spent years doing something almost nobody in academic psychology had done before him. He went undercover, training as a salesperson, a fundraiser, a marketer, to document manipulation techniques from the inside, in the field, as they were actually being used on real people, not in a controlled lab where subjects knew they were being studied. What he found, published in his research and later the book Influence, was that persuasion professionals had, through trial and error, independently discovered the exact same shortcuts Kahneman and Tversky were mapping in the lab. Authority. Social proof. Scarcity. Reciprocity. Commitment and consistency. Liking. Cialdini documented these not as abstract theory but as tools being deliberately deployed, refined, and taught in sales training rooms across the country, often without the trainers even knowing the academic names for what they were doing. They just knew it worked. Consider scarcity on its own. Cialdini's research showed that the mere suggestion something is limited, only 3 left, offer ends tonight, triggers a threat response completely disconnected from the object's actual value. A person's brain doesn't calmly evaluate whether they need the item. It registers the possibility of loss, and loss aversion, a concept Kahneman and Tversky also documented extensively, is one of the most powerful and fastest-acting instincts humans carry. We are wired to feel the pain of losing something roughly twice as intensely as we feel the pleasure of gaining something equivalent. A manipulator doesn't need to convince you of anything. They just need to make you feel like you're about to lose access to something, and your ancient loss detection system does the rest of the work for them, completely bypassing whatever careful analysis your intelligence might otherwise have applied. This is why a countdown timer on a checkout page works on a tenured professor exactly as well as it works on a teenager, and why the professor, later asked about it, will usually explain the purchase in perfectly rational-sounding terms, unaware that the reasoning came after the decision, not before it. Now picture a call center, not a scam operation in some distant country, but a legitimate corporate help desk, receiving a call from someone identifying themselves as an employee from another department, sounding mildly frustrated, mentioning a director's name correctly, asking for a password reset because they're locked out before an urgent client call. Kevin Mitnick, once one of the most wanted computer criminals in the United States before becoming a security consultant, spent his entire early career proving something that unsettled the entire cybersecurity industry. Almost none of his intrusions relied on breaking code. They relied on breaking people. In his own accounts and later teaching, documented extensively in his book The Art of Deception, Mitnick explained that the fastest route into any secured system almost never involved a technical exploit. It involved a phone call, a confident tone, a plausible detail, and a manufactured sense of urgency. He targeted help desk employees specifically because they were trained to be helpful, and that trained instinct toward helpfulness, itself a marker of professional competence, was the exact vulnerability he needed. He wasn't hacking software. He was running the same authority and urgency shortcut Cialdini documented, just wearing a headset instead of a name tag, and he later noted that the more competent and conscientious the employee on the other end of the line, the faster the call usually went, because conscientious people are precisely the ones most reluctant to leave a colleague stuck and locked out. Here's the part of this story that should actually concern you the most, more than any individual technique covered so far. In 1999, psychologists David Dunning and Justin Kruger at Cornell University published research on a bias that would eventually carry both their names. Their original focus was on incompetence. People with low skill in a domain tend to overestimate their ability in that domain, because the same lack of skill that makes them bad at a task also makes them bad at recognizing their own bad performance. But a related finding, explored further by Princeton psychologist Emily Pronine, uncovered something even stranger. Pronine's research on what she termed the bias blind spot found that intelligent, educated people are actually more confident than average that they personally are immune to cognitive biases and manipulation, even while showing no measurable difference in their actual susceptibility. In other words, the smarter and more educated someone is, the more likely they are to believe manipulation happens to other, less careful people, and that exact belief is what leaves the door unlocked. The finance executive who wired $47,000 almost certainly considered herself too sharp to fall for an obvious scam. That confidence wasn't a flaw in her intelligence. It was intelligence itself, quietly working against her, because System 2 was busy being confident about its own competence instead of scrutinizing the urgent email sitting in front of it. The scam that opened this video has an official name and a documented scale that makes it very hard to write off as a rare event. The FBI's Internet Crime Complaint Center, which tracks reported cybercrime losses across the United States, classifies this specific pattern as business email compromise, and its own annual reports have repeatedly identified it as one of the single costliest categories of cybercrime the agency tracks, with reported losses running into the billions of dollars over the years the category has been measured. The Bureau's own analysis of these cases repeatedly notes that the targets are disproportionately experienced finance and accounting professionals, not entry-level staff, not people unfamiliar with wire procedures, but the exact people whose job it is to be careful with money every single day. That detail matters more than it first appears. It means the scam isn't succeeding because the target doesn't understand finance. It's succeeding because understanding finance lives in System 2, and the attack is aimed, with real precision, at System 1, arriving dressed as routine, urgent, and entirely within the target's normal job description, at exactly the busiest, most distracted hour of a Tuesday afternoon. There's a version of this that isn't about money at all, and it might be the one that hits closest to home. Picture an elderly man in his kitchen on a Tuesday afternoon, phone pressed to his ear, hearing his grandson's voice, shaking, frightened, saying he's been in an accident and needs bail money wired immediately. Please don't tell mom and dad yet. The voice sounds exactly right, the same slight rasp, the same way his grandson says grandpa instead of granddad. He doesn't hesitate, because why would he? That's his grandson's voice. The Federal Trade Commission has documented a sharp rise in what it calls family emergency scams, and in recent years a disturbing new version has emerged using AI voice cloning tools that can convincingly recreate a real person's voice from just a few seconds of audio pulled from a social media video. The FTC's own consumer alerts describe cases where victims, including people who considered themselves careful and skeptical by nature, transferred money within minutes, because the one thing that overrides skepticism faster than almost anything else is a loved one's voice in distress. No lab coat, no confident salesman, just love and fear doing exactly what they evolved to do, faster than System 2 could ever catch up. So when you put all of this together, a pattern emerges that has nothing to do with how many books someone has read, what degree hangs on their wall, or how many corporate security trainings they've sat through and mentally checked out of. Authority triggers automatic compliance, evolved over hundreds of thousands of years when questioning a leader mid-crisis could get you killed. Social proof triggers automatic conformity, evolved because staying aligned with the group's shared perception of reality kept you inside its protection rather than exiled and vulnerable outside it. Scarcity triggers automatic loss aversion, evolved because missing a rare resource in an unforgiving environment often meant not eating that season, not next month. And love, the oldest and least suspicious instinct of all, triggers an override so fast and so complete it barely touches conscious thought before the decision is already made. Manipulators, whether they're running a business email compromise scam, a slot machine floor, a fraudulent help desk call, or a cloned voice on a phone line, aren't outsmarting your intelligence in any meaningful sense. They're routing around it entirely, going straight for a set of instincts installed in your nervous system long before intelligence, in the modern sense, existed at all. The finance executive from the beginning of this video did nothing unusually foolish. She responded to authority, urgency, and a plausible detail exactly the way a healthy human nervous system is built to respond, because for most of the time that nervous system has existed, responding that way kept people alive. The elderly man in his kitchen did nothing foolish either. He responded to his grandson's voice the way a loving grandparent is supposed to respond, instantly and without suspicion, because suspicion of family was never supposed to be the default, and a world where you have to fact-check your own grandson's voice is not a world any of these instincts were built for. The mismatch isn't a personal failure. It's a 300,000-year-old alarm system still running inside a world engineered, deliberately, by people who studied exactly how to trigger it, and now, increasingly, by tools that can fake the one voice you'd never think to question. If this kind of hidden mechanism is what keeps you coming back to this channel, you already know why. We dig into the instincts still quietly steering you long after the world that built them disappeared, one uncomfortable, well-documented case at a time. See you in the next one.